The first rule of staying alive as a mercenary? Never trust a client who pays too much too fast. I leaned back in the cracked leather booth of the underground bar, watching the man across from me twirl the stem of his glass like he was born rehearsed for this moment. Too smooth, too polished, too deliberate. He was the kind of client who smelled like trouble, not the sweaty, desperate kind I was used to, but the elegant, silk-lined trouble that came with sharp suits and blood on someone else's hands. He introduced himself as Mr. Lyle. Not that I cared. Men like him changed names the way I changed burner phones. "You've worked contracts before," he said, his voice calm, unhurried. The way he didn't bother to check over his shoulder told me he'd brought people. Men with guns, probably waiting outside. But this one is special. A single target. I sipped my whiskey. It was cheap and bitter. Perfect for a place like this, where the walls sweated smoke and desperation. "Special targets come with special headaches," I said. His smile never shifted. Rafe. The name dropped like a coin into a slot machine, and my stomach tightened before I could help it. I'd heard it before, whispered in military black markets, muttered in jungle camps where men cleaned guns with shaking hands. Rafe, the arms dealer who never missed, never lost, never got caught. The ghost who always came out richer. Lyle slid an envelope across the sticky table. I didn't need to open it. By its weight alone, I knew it wasn't just generous. It was obscene. Too many zeros. Too fast. Every instinct screamed walk away. But here's the problem with instincts. They don't pay rent. I slipped the envelope into my jacket, ignoring the itch crawling down my spine. "Fine. I'll play." The rest of the bar blurred into background noise, the clink of bottles, the scrape of boots, the dull buzz of a broken neon sign that sputtered the word hellhound. Maybe it was a warning. Or maybe the universe just had a bad sense of humor. I left Lyle and climbed the wet stairwell into the night, the city pressing down on me like a steel boot. Rain slicked the pavement, neon bled into puddles, and I felt the familiar weight of a job already sinking its claws into me. Rafe. I'd taken out warlords, politicians, CEOs with bodyguards stacked like dominoes. None of them lingered in the shadows of my mind the way his name did. Arms dealers were predictable. They wanted money, power, leverage. But the stories about him, they weren't about ambition. They were about inevitability. Deals that should have fallen apart didn't. Clients who should have betrayed him ended up loyal. Armies that should have collapsed kept fighting. And always, Rafe walked away richer. 2 nights later, I got my first glimpse of him. The meet was in an abandoned warehouse dressed up as a showroom, chandeliers hung between steel beams, crates of weapons stacked like modern art. I'd slid into the rafters with my rifle, breath even, body still. This was supposed to be reconnaissance before the kill. Map the exits, mark the guards, learn the rhythm of his empire. But then, I saw him. Rafe. Tall. Sharp lines where his suit should have wrinkled. Black hair slicked back carelessly like he didn't care enough to impress, and those eyes, green, but bright like glass catching firelight. He stood at the center of a crowd of men who were supposed to be predators. And yet, they leaned toward him like moths to a flame. No grand speech, no threats. Just a smile, a few low words I couldn't catch from where I crouched above, and grown men nodded like disciples. Deals closed without bargaining. Weapons changed hands without a single hesitation. Too easy. Too smooth. It wasn't just charisma. I'd seen charisma. This was something else. Like the air itself bent toward him. I adjusted my rifle, trying to steady my breathing, but my finger froze on the trigger. I'd been hunting killers for a decade, but for the first time, it didn't feel like I was looking at a man. It felt like I was looking at a storm disguised in a suit. And the worst part? A small, treacherous voice in my head whispered, "You don't stand a chance." The mansion didn't look like a fortress from the outside. That was the trick. Nestled in a quiet suburban enclave, it had manicured hedges, a fountain in the drive, and a double staircase spilling down from a white stone entryway. A politician could have lived here. Or a movie star. But the heat signatures I scanned on my visor told a different story. Guards posted. At every corner, drones circling overhead, reinforced glass on every window. Behind those ornate walls, the place breathed guns. I'd slipped in through the service wing, moving past kitchens that smelled of garlic and polish, then down into the underbelly of the house. Crates stacked in neat rows, stamped with markings from half a dozen countries. AKs from the east, rifles from the west, crates of grenades like candy waiting to be unwrapped. It was an arsenal disguised as luxury. Perfect. Except the hairs on my arms rose before anything went wrong. I ducked into a shadow and leveled my silenced pistol, only to hear footsteps approaching. Not the heavy boots of guards, but calm, measured strides. And then he appeared. Rafe. Tall, broad shoulders filling out a dark suit. Not a wrinkle on it despite the humidity. Black hair slicked back in a way that should have looked lazy but somehow didn't. And those eyes, green, too green, with a flicker like something alive burning just beneath. No weapon. No escort. Just him, walking into the room like he'd been expecting me all along. "You're early," he said, voice smooth, like I'd broken into a dinner party instead of a fortress. My pistol stayed trained on him, though my pulse skipped. "You're too lucky for a regular arms dealer." His mouth curved into that kind of smile men wear when they've already won. "And you're too persistent for a mercenary. Most don't make it past the garden fence." The easy banter would have annoyed me if it hadn't unsettled me first. He didn't flinch at the weapon aimed at his chest. Didn't even blink. I fired. Fast. Center mass, a warning shot designed to clip fabric and pin him in place, but he moved before I even squeezed the trigger, like he'd read my intent from my muscles. The bullet bit into the crate behind him. He tilted his head, amused. Predictable. I snarled under my breath and lunged from cover, switching to close quarters. If I couldn't outshoot him, I'd outmaneuver him. But every strike I threw, low kick, elbow, knife hand, he avoided with infuriating ease. Not faster than me. Just earlier. Like he already knew the attack before I made it. It wasn't human. Couldn't be. He caught my wrist mid-strike, the heat of his hands startling against my skin. "You're good," he said, almost gently. "But you fight like you're still waiting for permission." I twisted free and brought my blade up, close to his throat. "And you talk too much." His smile widened. "Maybe. Or maybe I just like watching you think." Before I could answer, the air shattered with gunfire. Not his men. Not mine. We both dove instinctively as bullets ripped through the crates. Splinters and metal filled the air. A half-dozen figures in black tactical gear stormed the lower floor. Faces masked, weapons trained on both of us without hesitation. Whoever they were, they hadn't come to negotiate. I landed hard behind a crate, adrenaline surging. My pistol was in my hand before the first intruder fired. Out of the corner of my eye, Rafe moved, not toward cover, but forward, like he was greeting the chaos. "Friends of yours?" I shouted over the gunfire. He glanced back at me, green eyes lit with something sharp, almost hungry. Not even close. And for the first time I realized neither of us was the hunter tonight. We were both the prey. The first bullet cracked through the window before I had time to decide whether I hated Rafe more than the masked gunman. Instinct won out. I hit the ground, rolled, and bolted for the nearest exit. Behind me, crates exploded like fireworks, raining down shards of splintered wood and steel. "Move." Rafe's voice was too calm for someone being shot at. I didn't need the command. I was already running. By the time I hit the garage bay, he was beside me, a set of keys jingling like he'd had them waiting in his pocket the whole time. "You brought your car to a firefight?" I snapped. "I'm a planner." He pressed the fob. The nearest armored SUV roared awake, lights cutting through the dark. I didn't argue. Arguing gets you killed. I dove into the passenger seat as the garage door rattled open. Rafe slid behind the wheel. And the moment the engine growled to life, I felt like I'd strapped myself to a predator. The SUV surged forward, tires screaming against the slick pavement. Headlights caught the glint of black helmets behind us, 3 vehicles giving chase. And above, drones blinked red in the night sky, circling like vultures. I yanked the rifle from the rack mounted between the seats. "I'll drive if you want to shoot," he smirked, swerving us into the main road. "No thank you. I like breathing." I rolled down the window, leaned out, and opened fire. The first burst clipped the hood of the lead car, sparks scattered, but it kept coming. I adjusted, lined up the shot again. Adrenaline sharpened everything. The hiss of neon lights sliding past. The hum of the engine, the precise recoil against my shoulder. "You're a terrible passenger," Rafe muttered, jerking the wheel as another car rammed our side. "And you're a terrible driver," I shot back, firing again. One of the pursuing cars spun out, smashed into a railing, and burst into flames. "Terrible, but effective," he added with a grin. The bastard was enjoying this. I reloaded quickly, eyes flicking to the drones overhead. Their red beams scanned the street like mechanical hounds. "Who the hell are they?" I demanded. Rafe downshifted, swerving us into a side street, the engines snarling like a beast released. "Persistent?" "That's not an answer." He glanced at me, green eyes bright even in the chaos. "Do you really want one right now?" "Yes," I hissed, firing again as glass shattered around us. "Then shoot straight, and maybe I'll consider it." Infuriating. He had the kind of face that begged to be punched, but I couldn't spare the hand. Another drone dipped lower, targeting lasers sweeping. I pulled my handgun and fired up at it. 1, 2, 3 rounds. The machine burst into sparks and dropped into the hood of the car chasing us. Explosion. Flames. Metal rained across the road. Rafe whistled low. "Impressive. I don't need compliments. I need answers." He didn't flinch, swerving us off the highway now, the city lights fading into darkness. Later, the SUV plunged onto a dirt road that wound into the tree line. Neon fell away, replaced by shadows and the green-black stretch of jungle. Branches scraped the sides, mud spattered the windows, the hum of drones dimming behind us. I lowered my rifle, breath tight, pulse hammering in my ears. "You planned this?" I asked finally, eyes on the narrowing trail. His hands rested steady on the wheel. "I told you. I'm a planner." I didn't like the implication that he'd expected me here, riding shotgun, running from the same ghosts. But I didn't have a choice. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't the one deciding who lived or died tonight. We had become allies, if only by default. The jungle didn't care about our war. It swallowed the armored SUV whole, muffling the growl of the engine beneath layers of wet earth and tangled vines. The further we pushed down the narrow contraband trail, the louder the night grew, cicadas screaming like broken alarms, frogs croaking deep in the swamps, the hiss of something slithering just out of sight. We ditched the vehicle when the mud grew too thick. I preferred it that way, quiet, light on my feet. Rafe moved beside me with the ease of someone who didn't mind the shadows clinging to his shoulders. His expensive suit had no place here. Yet he walked like the mud parted for him. "You're going to ruin those shoes," I muttered, scanning the undergrowth for movement. He glanced down at the gleaming leather, then back at me. "You're concerned? I just don't want you slowing me down when they stick to the ground." His grin flickered in the moonlight. "Noted." The first trap was crude, a tripwire strung knee-high between two trees. I caught at a breath before stepping through, my hand shooting out to stop him. "Don't tell me you didn't see that." "I did," he said smoothly. "I wanted to see if you did." I gave him a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "You're welcome." The second trap wasn't so forgiving. An arrow whistled past my ear, burying itself in the trunk with a thunk that vibrated through my bones. We hit the dirt at the same time, rolling into cover behind a rotted log. Gunfire cracked from deeper in the jungle. Automatic, messy, not meant to kill us clean but to hurt us. "Locals?" I whispered. "Locals don't use German rifles," Rafe replied calmly, pulling a sidearm from inside his jacket. "Mafia. Or what's left of them?" I took point, weaving us through the underbrush, senses sharpened. My old training kicked in, tracked the sound, read the mud, anticipate the angles. I felt his eyes on me, but every time I turned, he was already moving, his body flowing where it needed to be. He wasn't following me. He was moving with me. Like instinct, but not mine. That itch down my spine returned. He knew too much. Reacted too fast, not human fast. We reached the edge of a clearing, where rusted hangars sagged under the weight of vines and moss. Old war relics. perfect cover for smuggling. And inside, stacked high enough to scrape the roof, were crates stamped with familiar codes. Ammunition. Rockets. Enough to keep a small war blazing for months. I crouched, pulled out my comms device. A blinking red message awaited me. Target failed. Payment void. Do not return. Below that, one more line in clean cold letters. You are expendable. My jaw clenched until it hurt. I killed the screen, shoving it back in my pocket before he could read over my shoulder. But Rafe was watching anyway. Of course he was. They cut you loose, didn't they? His voice wasn't mocking. Not quite. Shut up. Now you know what it feels like. He stepped closer, lowering his weapon. You sell lives, Maya, same as me. The difference is, I never pretended otherwise. Heat flared in my chest. I don't sell lives. I take out men who deserve it. Because someone richer than you decided they do? His eyes gleamed, that unnatural green fire catching the moonlight. You kill for currency. I trade chaos for profit. Tell me, what's the difference? For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Because the worst part? I didn't have an answer that didn't taste like ash. Gunfire ripped the silence again, closer this time. They'd tracked us to the hangar. My pulse snapped back to reality. Conversation's over, I said sharply. Rafe tilted his head, smile returning like it had never left. Good. I was getting bored. We moved fast, planting charges around the hangar, silent in our efficiency. I didn't ask how he knew exactly where to place them, which support beams mattered most. I didn't want to know. By the time the first shadows closed in from the tree line, we were already sprinting for cover. I thumbed the detonator, and the world lit up. The blast tore the night apart. Fire roared into the sky, painting the trees in orange light. Metal screamed, crates ignited, and the jungle shuddered with the force of it. For one suspended heartbeat, the flames reflected in his eyes, brighter than anything human. He looked like he belonged to the inferno. And me? For reasons I didn't want to admit, I didn't look away. The jungle went quiet after the blast. Not silent, never silent, but quieter. The gunfire had stopped, the shouts had faded, and only the endless pulse of insects and the crackle of flames in the distance kept the night alive. We didn't risk the SUV again. Instead, we pushed deeper into the trees until we found a patch of dry ground under a collapsed canopy. It wasn't much, but it was hidden. Rafe lit a small fire like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The flames licked at his face, painting him in gold and shadow. He didn't look like a man who should have been able to pull off that trick in the middle of a jungle. I sat across from him, back against a log, rifle balanced over my knees. My shoulders still burned from where a splinter had caught me in the last firefight. Nothing life-threatening, but blood had a way of making itself known in the dark. He watched me too long. Not my face. My shoulder. What? I snapped. You should treat that wound, he said. Calm. Too calm. I've had worse. That doesn't mean you should ignore it. Something in his tone made me still. He wasn't lecturing. He was listening, almost, to the beat of my pulse. I ripped a strip of cloth from my shirt and tied it around the cut. When I glanced back up, his eyes were brighter than they should have been. All right, I said, breaking the tension. You going to tell me what you are, or do I keep guessing? Because normal men don't dodge bullets before they're fired? The corner of his mouth twitched. Then, finally, he leaned forward, firelight catching green eyes that seemed to burn from within. I'm not a normal man, he said simply. I'm a demon. I stared at him for a beat. Then a laugh broke out before I could stop it, harsh and too loud against the night. Well, thank God. At least you're not a vampire. He didn't laugh. The air between us tightened. My smile died. You feed on blood? I asked, wary. No, he said. I feed on war, on conflict, on chaos. Every deal I make, every fight I start, it gives me strength. I don't create it out of nothing. But once it starts, I can push it, bend it, keep it alive. That's why armies that should fall keep fighting. Why deals that should collapse hold together. It should have sounded insane. And yet, the memory of every impossible story I'd heard about him flashed in my head like puzzle pieces finally snapping into place. He didn't move closer, but the firelight shifted, and for a heartbeat, I swore the flames bent toward him. "You expect me to believe that?" I asked, though my voice wasn't steady. "I don't need you to believe," he said. "I only need you to see." His gaze flicked to my shoulder again. Before I could pull away, he reached across the fire, fingers brushing the edge of my bandage. It wasn't pain that jolted me. It was light. A faint glow flared where his skin touched mine, the fire inside his eyes answering in kind. My breath caught. The cut stung, but underneath the sting was something else, something hot, electric, dangerous. I jerked back, clutching my arm. "What the hell was that?" His voice was low, almost tender. Proof. I should have felt fear. And I did. But tangled with it was curiosity, and worse, something that felt like gravity pulling me toward him, toward the fire, toward the storm wrapped in a human shape. The silence stretched, heavy and alive. I hated how aware I was of him, every breath, every flicker of green fire in his eyes. Finally he leaned back, gaze steady on mine. "Now you know. But you can't leave, Maya." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Why not?" The fire crackled between us, throwing sparks into the night. His smile was sharp, dangerous, almost soft. "Because now you've seen me. And once you see me," he said, "you don't walk away." By the time we reached the outskirts of the city, the jungle had thinned into wasteland, abandoned warehouses, rusted shipping containers, the kind of place where shadows came to bargain. Rafe said nothing the entire trek, his expression unreadable, though every step he took seemed to hum with that unnatural energy. The base wasn't hidden well enough. It didn't need to be. Fear was its camouflage. A cracked fence, a chain-link gate, and beyond it, men with guns lounging like stray dogs around a carcass. Mafia. The same crew I'd spent half my life dodging. They let us through after a brief exchange with Rafe, though the way their eyes slid toward him told me all I needed to know. Respect wasn't the word. Fear wasn't either. It was calculation. They weren't weighing me. They were weighing him. Inside, the place stank of oil, sweat, and gunpowder. Crates of contraband lined the walls, and I noticed how the guards avoided standing too close to him. It was subtle. Too subtle. I knew the look. Men planning a mutiny. We hadn't been inside 5 minutes before it started. A half-circle of Rafe's own men blocking the exit, weapons low but ready. "You've changed," their leader said. A scarred brute, with a voice like gravel. His accent was old country, but the disdain was universal. "The chaos doesn't stick to you anymore. You've gone soft." Rafe didn't even look surprised. He tilted his head slightly, like he'd been waiting. "Soft? You let her live?" The man jerked his chin toward me. "You fight beside her. That's not the Rafe we follow." For once, I didn't fire back with a quip. My throat tightened. They weren't wrong. He had spared me. More than once. Rafe's smile was slow, dangerous. "You think mercy makes me weak?" "Yes." The man lifted his rifle. "And weakness gets replaced." For a heartbeat, I thought Rafe might let them try. Then his eyes flared that impossible green, brighter than the hanging bulbs. The air snapped, heavy with heat, and every man in the room froze, sweat breaking across their foreheads. I didn't hear a threat. I felt it, like their bones did. "Then replace me," Rafe said softly, almost inviting. Not a single finger pulled a trigger. When the silence finally broke, they scattered, muttering excuses, avoiding his gaze like prey turning tail. I was still catching my breath when I heard a voice I hadn't expected in 1,000 lifetimes. "Maya." I spun. He stepped out from the shadows near the loading bay. Same square jaw, same sharp eyes I remembered from childhood. But harder now. Older. My brother. Daniel. I hadn't seen him in years. Not since he'd fallen in with the wrong kind of men, and I'd chosen my own path. For a moment, all the weapons, demons, and fire in the world blurred. All I saw was him. "Danny," I whispered, before I could stop myself. He gave me a small smile. "Not warm. Not safe. You look the same. Stubborn." I swallowed the storm in my chest. What are you doing here? What I have to. His glance flicked to Rafe, then back to me. They're watching him, waiting for the right time. If you're smart, you'll help them. You can save yourself. Maybe me too. The words landed like a blade between my ribs. You're asking me to betray him, I said. I'm asking you to live. His voice cracked for the first time. You think you're his partner? You're not, you're leverage. When he burns, you'll burn with him. I hated that he sounded almost protective. Like he thought this was love, not manipulation. Behind me I felt Rafe's presence, silent, waiting. He could probably hear every word. For the first time in years, I didn't know where to put my loyalty. Not with a client, not with a job. With blood. With chaos. With myself. And for the first time I wasn't sure which of those I could trust. The old factory smelled like rust and ghosts. Iron beams jutted from broken concrete, glass crunched under my boots. And the night air whistled through hollow windows like a warning. It was the kind of place where people came to disappear. Or to die. Rafe moved ahead of me, his stride steady, deliberate. I followed, but every step dragged heavier than the last. Daniel's words still burned in my chest. You can save us both. Betray him. I wanted to scream at the universe for its cruelty. First, my client sold me out. Now my brother asked me to do the same. And in the middle of it all stood Rafe, the storm in a suit, the man, or demon. I couldn't stop circling like a moth near fire. The shadows deepened as we reached the center of the factory floor. He stopped, glancing around like he could see more than concrete and steel. They'll come, he said. It's what I do. I tightened my grip on my rifle. Do you ever get tired of inviting death? His smile was thin. Do you? The question hit harder than I wanted. I set my jaw. At least I'm human. He turned then, eyes burning in the dim light, green flames barely restrained. You think that makes you better? Yes, I snapped, anger sparking from exhaustion and fear. You're a monster. You feed on death, on war. You create chaos just to taste it. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then his voice dropped, dark and sharp as broken glass. And you? You kill for money. You take contracts from men who never stain their own hands. Tell me, Maya, how many lives have you sold for a paycheck? How many deaths sit in your bank account? And what makes you better than me? My chest ached. I wanted to deny it, to spit in his face. But my mouth stayed dry, because part of me, the part that hated long quiet nights when memories crept in, knew he wasn't wrong. I choose my targets, I forced out. And I choose mine, he countered smoothly. We're not different, Maya, we're reflections. I hated him for saying it. I hated him for being right. Before I could answer, the sound of boots echoed through the factory. A ripple of movement in the shadows. Dozens of them, armored, armed, rifles catching the faint light. My stomach sank. An army. Rafe looked up at the catwalks, the broken stairwells, the men forming a circle around us. And then, infuriatingly, he smiled. They want both of us, he murmured, almost with delight. I raised my rifle, heat flooding my veins. Then let's make them regret it. He glanced at me, green fire flashing. For a second I saw something raw in his eyes. Admiration, maybe even respect. Then it vanished, replaced by the hunger of a predator about to be unleashed. Finally, he said, rolling his shoulders as if welcoming the kill. Something worth feeding on. The circle tightened, weapons raised. I could hear the orders shouted, boots slamming against the concrete, the scrape of steel against steel. My finger rested steady on the trigger, but my pulse hammered loud enough to drown the noise. For one brief moment, we locked eyes. I didn't know if he was my ally, my enemy, or something worse. But I knew one thing. We were about to stand back to back against the world. And then the first shot rang out. The war began. Chaos didn't creep in, it exploded. The first shot cracked across the factory floor, and suddenly the world dissolved. Into muzzle flashes, shouts, and the thunder of boots on rusted steel. I dropped behind a collapsed beam, firing in short bursts, counting targets, watching them scatter like cockroaches. Rafe was beside me 1 second, gone the next. For a heartbeat I thought he'd vanished, until I saw him rise, unflinching, walking straight into the hail of bullets. "Are you insane?" I shouted, ducking as a round pinged off the concrete above my head. "Always," he answered, too calm, and then his hand shot out, yanking me to my feet. With me, we moved. Together. I'd fought with partners before, soldiers, mercs, men who trusted me to cover their backs. None of them felt like this. Every time I spun, his shoulder brushed mine. Every time I ducked, he rose. Every strike I threw, he was already clearing the path ahead. It wasn't training. It wasn't chance. It was as if he knew me, move for move, thought for thought. And the longer it went on, the more I felt it, that pull, that strange current thrumming between us like an electric wire ready to snap. The enemy pressed hard, herding us toward the old storage hangars. Explosions shook the ground as grenades tore through the walls, spraying rust and flame. I stumbled into cover behind a crate, chest heaving. A shard of metal grazed my cheek, warm blood running down my skin. Then, I saw him, not the man in the suit, not the careful smuggler who smiled at chaos like it was a private joke. The demon. His eyes burned green, brighter than any firelight, and the air around him rippled, heat rolling off in waves. Shadows bent toward him. Men hesitated before firing, as if instinct screamed predator. He didn't fight like a soldier, he fought like a storm. Fluid, inevitable, merciless. And God help me, I couldn't look away. He tore through their ranks, disarming, striking, every movement precise and terrifyingly graceful. Bullets whined past him, but half of them seemed to bend, their aim ruined by some invisible force. I'd laughed before at his demon confession, but now? Now I felt it in my bones. A demon of war. And he was beautiful. "On your left!" I shouted, swinging my rifle just in time to drop a man lunging with a blade. But another came from the opposite side, and I wasn't fast enough. Rafe was. His hand closed around the attacker's wrist, twisting until bone cracked, and in the same motion he shoved the man into the path of incoming fire. I staggered back, breath caught in my throat. "Focus," he said, voice low, steady, his gaze searing through me even in the chaos. I wanted to curse him. I wanted to scream. Instead, I raised my rifle and fired, clearing the catwalk above us. My pulse was too fast, my lungs burning with smoke and adrenaline. We crashed through the last line of crates, backs slamming into each other, enemies closed from every angle, shouting in languages I half understood, the warehouse blazing orange from the fires spreading through the walls. "Still think I'm a monster?" Rafe called over the din, spinning to break a man's jaw with his elbow. "Yes," I snarled, firing 3 rounds into the chest of a soldier rushing me. "But you're my monster right now." He laughed, dark, wild, alive. The ground shook as another explosion ripped through the hangar. I stumbled, slipping on debris. My rifle clattered away, and in the chaos, a masked soldier raised his weapon at me. I didn't even have time to flinch. Rafe was there in a blur, shoving me down as the shot rang out. The bullet grazed his arm, tearing cloth, flesh. But he didn't so much as stagger. He loomed over me, chest heaving, smoke and fire painting his silhouette. For a heartbeat it was just us. His face inches from mine, eyes burning like coals in the dark. My pulse matched the thunder in my ears. I hated him, feared him, wanted him. Every emotion tangled into one unbearable knot. And then, the knot snapped. I grabbed his collar and kissed him, fierce, desperate, furious. He kissed me back like he'd been waiting for it. Like the war itself had led us here. His mouth tasted of smoke and blood, his grip rough on my jaw, and the world kept burning around us. But for one moment, it was only fire and breath, and the sharp, terrifying truth of what we'd become. When we finally broke apart, the air between us was molten. His lips curved in that infuriating smile. Finally, I shoved him back, snatching up my rifle, cheeks hot despite the smoke. "Don't get used to it." Another explosion tore through the hangar, cutting off whatever he might have said. The battle wasn't over, but something inside me already was. The last stronghold loomed in the distance, a concrete beast crouched against the skyline. The main warehouse of the mafia, bigger, meaner, and bristling with guards. If the factory had been a skirmish, this was the war they'd been building toward. We approached through the back, slipping past rusted fuel tanks and broken trucks. The stench of oil and cordite hung in the air, thick enough to choke. Inside, I knew, were crates stacked with ammunition, grenades, rockets, everything a small army needed to keep terror alive. Destroy this, and their plans would collapse with it. Rafe moved like he owned the night, silent, precise, carrying that aura of inevitability. I followed, rifle in hand, adrenaline already gnawing through my nerves. Plant the charges on the load-bearing walls, I whispered. I was going to, he said smoothly. And I hated that he made even demolition sound like foreplay. We worked fast, weaving through the shadows, setting explosives where they would do the most damage. The ticking in my chest grew louder with each planted charge. And then, Maya, I froze. Daniel. He stepped out from between two crates, his face pale in the half-light, eyes heavy with something I didn't want to name. Behind him, 3 mafia soldiers fanned out, weapons raised. Danny, I breathed, lowering my rifle a fraction. He looked older than I remembered, worn down by smoke and sins. You can still stop this. You don't have to go down with him. Rafe stood just behind me, silent, watching. I felt his presence like a shadow pressed against my back. Get out of the way, I said, forcing my voice steady. You don't understand. Daniel's voice cracked, desperate. If you do this, they'll kill me. You can save us both, just give him up. My throat tightened. It was the same plea as before, sharper now, like a blade angled at my ribs. I remembered when we were kids, him dragging me out of trouble, swearing he'd always look out for me. And now here we were, on opposite ends of the same gun. Danny. My chest burned. I can't. Yes, you can. His hand trembled around his weapon. You think he cares about you? You're nothing to him. You're leverage. You're... Enough? Rafe's voice cut through, low, sharp, too calm. Daniel flinched, but his eyes never left me. Maya, please. The words cracked something inside me. For a moment, I wanted to drop everything, to run, to pretend there was still a world where family mattered more than blood and betrayal. But I'd seen too much, lived too much, and I knew one thing with brutal clarity: Daniel had chosen his side long before I had to choose mine. I'm sorry, I whispered, and pulled the trigger. The shot hit the ground near his feet, forcing him back. I couldn't kill him. Not like that. But I couldn't save him either. Rafe's hand closed around mine, pulling me toward the exit. We're out of time. The charges beeped in unison, a chorus counting down to fire. We sprinted, weaving through crates as gunfire erupted behind us. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop. Not with the weight of Daniel's stare still burning into my back. Not with the roar of death building in the walls around us. We burst through the loading bay just as the first explosion went off. The shockwaves slammed into us, flinging me face first into the mud outside. Heat scorched the back of my neck, fire climbed the night sky, and the ground shook like the earth itself was breaking. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then a weight landed beside me, and I turned my head to see Rafe sprawled in the dirt, his suit torn, face streaked with soot. We lay there, gasping, covered in mud and ash, the warehouse collapsing in flames behind us. Finally, I broke the silence. If we survive this... My voice rasped, shaky but alive. You're buying me coffee. Rafe's laugh came rough and genuine, shaking the air between us. Deal. And for the first time that night, despite the fire, despite the blood, I almost felt like we'd already won. Dawn crept slow and heavy over the horizon, painting the world in a pale, uncertain light. The warehouse was gone, nothing left but jagged beams sticking out of blackened earth, smoke curling upward like the last breath of something finally dead. I stood at the edge of the ruin, mud caked to my boots, soot on my skin. The fire had died down hours ago, but its echo still hummed in my chest. My body ached, muscles bruised, lungs raw from smoke. And yet, somehow, I was still standing. Behind me, Rafe moved closer, his shadow long in the morning light. He looked worse for wear. Shirt torn, cuts streaking his arms, a bruise blooming along his jaw. But even battered and filthy, he carried himself like the flames had been his coronation. We stood in silence for a while, watching the wreckage. Birds hadn't dared return yet. Even the jungle seemed to hold its breath. Finally, he spoke. "It's done." I almost laughed. Done? That implies anything is ever done in this line of work. His gaze stayed on the ruins. They'll scatter. Without the weapons, without the power, they'll tear each other apart. It will take years before anyone tries to build this empire again. And in those years? I asked. He glanced at me then, eyes still glowing faintly in the soft light. Not burning like fire anymore, but simmering, like embers waiting for air. That depends on what we decide. I raised an eyebrow. We? Yes. His mouth curved into a small wry smile. Unless you've decided to put a bullet in my head while my back is turned. Tempting, I said, though the sarcasm in my voice was softer than usual. We both knew I wasn't going to. The silence stretched again, gentler this time. He turned his gaze back to the horizon. For once, he didn't look like the storm I'd seen in battle. He looked tired, human, almost. Then his voice dropped, quiet, but certain. "I've found something worth more than war." The words lodged in my throat. I turned to face him, arms crossed, trying to mask the sudden warmth curling in my chest. "And what's that supposed to mean?" His eyes met mine, steady, unflinching. "You," I scoffed automatically, forcing a smirk to cover the way my pulse betrayed me. "Me? Please. You've got terrible taste." He didn't flinch, didn't laugh. Just held my gaze. And something in his silence rattled me more than any bullet ever had. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head, but I couldn't stop the tug at the corner of my mouth. "So, I'm more valuable than war?" "Yes." I arched a brow, smirk sharpening just enough to keep me steady. "And here I thought you were addicted to chaos." "I am," he said softly, almost like a confession, but maybe not the kind I thought. For once, I didn't argue. We stood there in the gray light, surrounded by ashes, our bodies broken, our futures uncertain. And against all logic, for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. The house was small, quiet, and smelled faintly of salt. Waves broke against the rocks below, steady and patient, as if the ocean had been waiting for us. The place wasn't mine, wasn't his, just a rental, 4 walls and a roof perched on the edge of nowhere. And yet, for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I sat at the kitchen table, a metal tin in front of me. Inside were contracts, old jobs, old sins, pages with blood money written between the lines. Every deal I'd taken, every life I'd traded a piece of myself for. The lighter clicked in my hand. Once, twice. Finally, the flame caught. Paper curled and blackened, smoke rising in thin ribbons toward the open window. I watched each sheet shrivel into ash, one by one, until the tin was nothing but glowing embers. My chest felt lighter. Not free, but close. Rafe leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, his silhouette framed by the last colors of sunset bleeding into the sea. He looked out of place in a faded shirt and rolled sleeves. But the weight he used to carry, the empire, the fear, the storm, was gone. "You're really done," he said quietly. "Yeah." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "For good?" He gave a short nod. "So am I. The name, the network, the dealers, they'll all vanish. By tomorrow, Rafe the arms merchant won't exist anymore." I arched a brow. "You're going to miss it." He tilted his head, that infuriating half-smile tugging at his lips. "Not as much as you think." I leaned back in the chair, stretching my sore legs. "So what does that make us now? 2 people with too much blood on their hands, sitting by the ocean pretending we're normal?" "Something like that," he said. The last of the papers crumbled into dust. I closed the tin, exhaling through the heaviness in my chest. "We're both destroyers, Rafe." He pushed off the doorway, crossed the room, and stopped just in front of me. His gaze was steady, unflinching, and softer than I'd ever seen it. "Yes. But together." He brushed a fingertip across the edge of my jaw. Barely a touch, but enough to anchor me. "Together, we can build." For once, I didn't argue. I just let the silence stretch, the waves filling it in for us. Then I ruined the moment. Because that's what I do. If you think you're off the hook for dinner, you're wrong. I cooked last night. His laugh was low, rich, more human than anything I'd heard from him before. You call that cooking? You burned water. It was experimental. It was a disaster. We walked out onto the porch as the sun dipped into the horizon, still bickering, still circling each other like we didn't know how else to be. The night air smelled of salt and smoke, and for once, neither of us had anywhere else to run. We weren't clean. We weren't saints. But we were alive, together, and ready to start something new. Even if we killed each other over who was making dinner.